So what took place now, which was somewhere towards the end of 1969, was the recording of the Elton John album. This would be Elton's second album, made up from the songs, as I said, that Elton had already demoed at the studio at DJM, these great piano and voice demos. Now they were having meetings about to decide the exact arrangements and musicians and how it would be recorded. So this was going to be an amazingly exciting time. It was talked about these songs would be written, not just the string arrangements, but even the drum parts and the bass parts and the guitar parts were going to be written out. So this would need session musicians. And while Steve was involved in the production meetings, I was in the office booking these musicians and booking the studio time and backing vocalist and this sort of thing. On drums, it was talked about having Barry Morgan, an amazing session drummer, and guitarists were booked, also harp, and that was going to be played by a long-time friend of Elton's, Scala Kanga. They went to the same Royal Academy of Music together. I had a pretty amazing list at the time of backing singers, and I still have that list. It includes Dusty Springfield and Kiki Dee and Sue and Sonny, all these amazing singers, and sometimes I would just ring them all, and whoever turned up would be on the session, and sometimes that could be 8 or 10 singers, Liza Strike and Madeline Bell and Roger Cook from Blue Mink, Tony Burrows, Kay Garner, Leslie Duncan, who went on to actually do a duet with Elton on his next album. Yeah, Gus wanted a really big backing vocal sound, so we booked as many singers as possible, and one particular song they featured on was, of course, the Great Border Song. So the studio was booked. It was actually booked in the old-fashioned way of sessions, so that there'd be 3-hour sessions, and so actually the basic tracks for these for this amazing album was actually laid down in only a few days. Sadly and incredibly, I wasn't at these sessions. I had to do some work for the record company. I had to go and see a band that we were signing up in Scotland. I used to call Steve every evening on these days and ask how it was going, obviously, and he just said that these sessions are going amazingly well. You know, can't wait for you to hear them. They're just sounding absolutely brilliant. Trident Studios, just to give you a little bit of background, was an absolutely amazing state-of-the-art brand new studio. It was a little bit unusual because there were no tape machines in the control room, which is a bit strange. Normally you have the tape machines in the control room. No, these were on another floor, and that's where the assistant engineer would be, and the engineer used to speak to his assistant via an intercom. The engineer on these sessions was Robin Jeffrey Cable, another amazing character, brilliant engineer, rather posh actually, but he knew his work, he knew his business, and he was the engineer on these sessions. But enough of this technical stuff. Of course, as soon as I got back from Scotland, I went straight to Trident and couldn't wait to hear these recordings. What I heard when Gus played the album and these rhythm tracks back through these massive speakers that they had at Trident was just the most amazing sounds and musicianship and arrangements that I'd ever heard. Gus liked to have the volume at ear-shattering level, which obviously made it even more amazing. But Gus was now God as far as we were concerned, or as far as I was concerned. He had just lifted Elton songs into a completely different stratosphere, and this was just sounding totally amazing. It wasn't just the musicianship, as I say, the sound was just totally brilliant. Gus had Barry Morgan's tom-toms at amazing level. They just sounded incredible. And it was, you know, there's no denying it was like listening to a Beatles album, because Gus's sounds and his production were really miles ahead of anything I'd ever heard before. So this was really very exciting. There were a lot more sessions at Trident because obviously the lead vocals had to be done and backing vocals and some overdubs, but it really didn't take very long to finish this album. And then the next stage would be mixing, which also happened at Trident, and they were great sessions to go to some of these mixing sessions. When all the mixing was completed, everyone was happy. It now had to be cut. I booked the cutting room, and I'm sure I went to that cutting session at Trident, which was also a great experience. It was the last part of the album's production, but extremely important one in those days when you were cutting to vinyl, and I'm pretty sure it was Ray Staff at Trident who did this. Following this, we would get the test pressings back, and I would check these to make sure. Sometimes you used to get jumping that would happen, and obviously we didn't want that, so I would check these to make sure everything was good with that. Then there was the album sleeve to sort out, and just like with everything in Elton's career at this time, we wanted to make sure it was of the very best possible. One thing maybe not many people know, at the time there was the Crosby, Stills and Nash album. The first of their albums was released, and it was in this beautiful sleeve, and it had a particular finish to it. It was like a furry sort of finish, which was quite unusual, and Steve said, look, we've got to get this for Elton's sleeve. So even though it cost a lot more money, I think it was 2 6 or 3 shillings, which was quite a bit more than the usual sleeve per sleeve, we were going to get this finish, so that was one thing. Obviously, a photo needed doing for the front, and we would just have to book the best photographer in the country at the time, which I think was David Bailey. David Bailey was really a fashion photographer, but he was renowned for being great. So obviously, this would be a good idea. So a session was booked with David Bailey. Actually, as it turned out, this session didn't really go that brilliantly. So none of those shots were actually used, which was a shame. But the shot that did end up on the front, which was put together by Dave Larkham, was a great shot of Elton, and still looks great today. And also obviously the back, which shows a lot of the people involved on the sleeve, including the amazing Diana Lewis, who was actually Paul Buckmaster's girlfriend at the time, who played Moog synthesizer on 2 of the tracks on the Elton John album. Paul Buckmaster, as I said earlier, played cello, and he played solo cello on The Greatest Discovery. The next thing to do was to have the lyrics printed on the sleeve. Absolutely, brilliant lyrics by Bernie. So I used to check these lyrics to make sure that they were the ones that Elton was singing, because sometimes he might change 1 or 2 of the words from what Bernie had actually written. So I used to go through the album many, many times, making sure that the lyrics on the sleeve were the ones that Elton was singing, and I hope to have got that right. One thing that's interesting looking back on these days and this amazing time was that this was all happening towards the end of March, with the album being released early April. And I don't know whether you know, I'm sure people know, Elton fans know that Elton is an Aries, and me too. And I've always found that some of my best things happened in this period, the Aries period. And certainly this was happening so brilliantly for Elton, and just happens to be through that Aries period for him too. The album was released on April the 10th, so we were getting ready to promote this album, and we were just going to go full out for this. Actually, it was unusual, we took some adverts out on the TV, which was very, very expensive in those days. And I remember when the ad came up, we'd all be ringing round. Every time anything used to happen in Elton's career, whether it was in the day or in the middle of the night, we'd call up each other, Steve Brown and all that, and say, wow, did you see that? There was an advert for the album on TV. I also remember actually one of Elton's songs, I don't know whether it was from the Elton John album, was actually played during an episode of Coronation Street, and we just thought, wow, this is it, he's made it. Getting a plug on Coronation Street, we just thought that was brilliant. Anyway, I was involved, as I say, in promoting this album, and actually I was in charge of doing in-store displays, and this was quite a new thing, and I'd taken out all these adverts and displays in a lot of the music shops and record shops in London and in Soho, which was a good thing because Elton John was pretty unknown really generally at this time, and you had to get the record shops to stock this album, and they'd never heard of Elton John. So the fact that they were doing in-store displays made them stock the record and keep it in stock. We also took out adverts on the bus, so I don't know whether anyone knows about that, and it said Elton Who. I mean, not many people on the planet don't know who Elton John is now, but then we were advertising a new artist and a new name. So Elton Who was on these buses, still with the stickers, but, we were really promoting this album now. One thing that's worth mentioning is that I would often go into hi-fi shops, and the album that they would tend to choose to show off the latest hi-fi system would often be this new Elton John album, because of its brilliant quality that Gus had produced, because it was so ahead of its time in terms of just production and sound quality. The first single to be released from the album was Border Song, which was released on the 24th of April, 1970. Might have seemed a strange choice, but we just thought this was the most commercial song on there, with big backing vocals and a really brilliant gospel track. And in fact, later on, Aretha Franklin recorded this, and many people have covered it since. So this was released as a single, and I actually have it in my records that somewhere in the first 2 weeks this was released, I think the sales were about 4,500. I used to ring up and get the sales figures every day, and then Elton would always want the sales figures, so it was my job to sort of ring him and give him these figures, and sometimes that wasn't an easy job, especially when it hadn't sold very many that day. But Border Song was doing well, and I distinctly remember being in the office when the phone went, and it was Top of the Pops, the biggest show in the UK on TV, Top of the Pops, and they wanted to book Elton to do Border Song because of its sales, and it was doing well. So, wow, this was just incredible news. He hadn't had Top of the Pops before. So after the phone went down, everyone was whooping and yelling, and Elton's worrying about what he's going to wear. And I also remember him going with Ray Williams to probably get something from Chelsea or Carnaby Street so that he had something to wear for that show. Incredible to think back about these things now. And obviously, yes, I was involved in putting together the Top of the Pops and making sure everyone was there, because actually it was going to be recorded live. And we just thought, wow, this is it. You know, everything's going to take off from now on. And he did Top of the Pops. We all watched it. We all thought it was brilliant. You know, we had a lot of the backing vocalists there, and we just thought it was a great broadcast. So waited for the sales the next day, which we just figured were going to go through the roof. And I rang up to get the sales, and they weren't great. You know, they were about the same, maybe a few hundred, or they just weren't anything we expected after this brilliant broadcast. So that was a bit disappointing. Elton wasn't one to get depressed for too long, though, and we certainly weren't either, because, you know, this wasn't going to happen overnight, fair enough, but it certainly wasn't going to stop us trying. And in the meantime, Elton had been busy putting together a new band. We had some gigs coming up, things were happening in that area, the live situation, and so, you know, we heard he's getting a new band together. And I remember distinctly going along to DJM, to the studio, to see Elton rehearsing. I can remember walking into the studio area, and there, straight ahead, was this huge drum kit with amazing drummer Nigel Olsson there. I knew Nigel from the band Plastic Penny that was signed to Page One that we'd worked with. And then there's Dee Murray. I can see Dee there with a big amp. On the right-hand side, Elton's at the piano. You know, it's just the upright piano there at Dick James. So now I'm looking around for Caleb, and there's no Caleb. Where's Caleb? You know, he must be here somewhere. But he's not there. There's no Caleb. And so I asked, I said, where's Caleb? And Elton said, no, he's not in this band. No, there's no guitarist in this band. And I just thought, wow, that's pretty strange. How can you have a band without a guitarist? Anyway, they started to play a couple of the songs from the Elton John album, and it just sounded absolutely phenomenal. They did these amazing rock versions, three-piece versions of 60 Years On, with Dee playing chords on the bass, and this great big drum sound with Nigel. And wow, this was very, very different, and typical of Elton to find a way just to make things even better and to try something different, because this really did sound marvelous, and obviously looking forward to seeing the gigs with this new band. I mean, I don't know whether there was a personality problem there. Caleb was roaring, you know, with his band Hookfoot, and he was very much the leader of his band. So, you know, there might have been something going on there where, you know, Elton, this was his career now, so he needed to be the head and the focus in the new band. Elton, amazing on the piano, and admittedly, leaving it free of guitar would be able to get the piano, you know, up to the front. And this was a very different sort of lineup to anything we'd seen before. So piano, bass, and drums. Wow. I can remember, as I say, I'm pretty good at remembering stuff from the past. I definitely remember Elton playing the Revolution Club with this new band. It was the 25th of March, 1970, and I was sitting in the audience. Elton came on with the three-piece, and they started going through some of these songs that, you know, I'd heard them rehearse, and it just sounded brilliant. You know, the audience were appreciative, you know, they weren't going mad or anything. But anyway, the last song that they did was Burn Down the Mission, which I don't even think had been recorded yet. And at the end of Burn Down the Mission, he starts going into this rock and roll section. He's hammering away on the piano there, and suddenly he stops playing the piano and starts getting up and dancing around the stage. I think he had a tambourine there, and I'm just thinking, what is going on here? This is going to be embarrassing. I'd never seen him do this before. He never really left the piano on any of the gigs that I'd seen. But I'm looking around at the audience, and they're loving it, and they're starting to clap along, and maybe a few are standing up, and there's just an amazing atmosphere, a new atmosphere in this room that I hadn't experienced at an Elton John concert before. And at the end of Burn Down the Mission, the audience just went absolutely wild. Yeah, this was a new direction for the gigs to take. This was a proper rock gig. It was just getting in line for what was yet to come, which was America.